Hello everybody, and welcome to the 18th EURADOS webinar, which is entitled Things to Consider When Your Simulations Are Finished. For those of you who don't know EURADOS, EURADOS is an association of about 80 institutions active in radiation dosimetry and about 300 individual members. EURADOS promotes good practice and harmonization of dosimetry in Europe, and is organized in 8 working groups. And one of these working groups is Working Group 6, Computational Dosimetry, which is chaired by myself. My name is Hans Warbus. I'm working at PDB in Germany. The webinar will have 3 presentations that are somehow meant as teasers for a special issue that we published last year about a number of intercomparisons that have been going on over the last decade in the area of computational dosimetry. The first presentation will be by Maria Sankel. Maria used to work for the Helmholtz Center in Munich, and since recently is working for the German Radiation Protection Office there. And her presentation will be about exercises related to the ICRP-ICRU Adult Reference Computational Phantoms. The second presentation is by Voja Brkic. Voja is working at the medical department of the University of Osijek in Croatia. And his presentation will be about investigations into the dose to the fetus under maternal radiotherapy. And the last presentation will be by myself on a joint exercise between 2 working groups on gold nanoparticles. So, and after the 3 presentations, there will be a question and answer session, which will be moderated by our colleague Jonathan Eakins from Public Health England, or actually UK Health Security Agency now. If you have questions or you have problems, we have on the right top corner a chat and a Q&A. The chat is basically telling people hello or saying, okay, I have a problem, I cannot hear anything or cannot see anything. Then the technical staff in the background will actually try to help you. The Q&A part is meant to post your questions. Some of them may already be answered online, but the remaining questions will be collected and answered to the whole audience at the end. We also do have polls, and we actually start with the first poll. We would like to learn a little bit about your background. So Babs, could you please start the first poll? Okay. So, okay, so Babs, I'm actually not sure which poll is up at the moment. Okay, here we got one. Okay, so 60% are not EURADOS associates. That's nice. We like to, okay, it's still changing a little bit. Okay, and actually there was a poll before which somehow I did not see really. Okay, closed. Okay. Anyway, let's suggest that we move to the next poll question, which is about whether you use Monte Carlo simulations in your research. Could you start that one, please, Babs? Okay, everyone uses it. Great. Okay, it's only 3 answers at the moment, so maybe we wait for a few more people to answer. Okay. And then let's move to the next one, which is actually asking how you would rate your proficiency level with respect to radiation transport simulations. Okay, then I have to minimize this one. Okay. All right. Okay, we had much more answers to the other questions. Okay, now it's improving. Okay, the statistics. Okay, it's very broadly distributed. That's nice. Okay, the more experienced ones are coming in. Okay, so that was just to poll the audience. Now, before we start, I would like to give a short introduction to the general scope here and basically try to explain to you the idea behind the eye catcher that we had there. So the eye catcher, in fact, okay, actually I have to skip over the polls. Okay. The eye catcher, in fact, at the background has images from the publications that we have in this special issue. And in the front, we have a flow diagram, which is showing more or less the procedures that you usually have when you do a simulation. You start in the top left corner with a brilliant idea, a problem you want to solve, and then you have to sit down at the bottom in front of your computer, do some programming. And then at some point the program is running, and then there comes this branching where the computer is working. That's supposed to be illustrated by the upper picture, and you can relax, okay, if your boss lets you, until the point when you get your data. And then, of course, you have your data. You did that for some research purpose, and you want to publish something. This is shown on the top right corner. Now, the content of this webinar is that you actually should not use this shortcut. You should actually, when you have your data, have a critical look at them and then really decide, am I already there at this point where I can publish them, or do I have to go back to the programming and redo the whole thing again? So with that, I would like to hand over to Maria for her presentation.
Thank you, Hans. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to introduce to you the EURADOS exercises related to the ICRP-ICRU adult reference computational phantoms. EURADOS Working Group 6 has conducted an intercomparison exercise on the usage of the adult ICRP reference computational phantoms of ICRP publication 110. The exercise consisted of 6 tasks that describe different exposure situations. For example, a cobalt-60 point source in front of the phantoms, a 10 keV neutron point source at the same position, ground contamination with americium-241, exposure in a cloud of nitrogen-16, 2 X-ray examinations, chest PA and abdomen AP, and internal exposure considering monoenergetic photons, electrons, and 2 specific radionuclides. The phantoms to be used for these tasks are the reference computational phantoms of ICRP publication 110. These are voxel phantoms of a reference adult male, you see it on the left-hand side, and a reference adult female on the right-hand side. These phantoms have millions of voxels and 140 organ identification numbers. They can be downloaded from the link given here via the ICRP website. As an example, I would like to show you a few specific informations about the abdomen AP X-ray examination. This task was specified as follows. There is a divergent rectangular energy spectral X-ray source as point source placed in front of the phantom and directed towards it, and the energy spectrum was provided. There is also an imaginary rectangular image receptor behind the phantom at a distance of 115 centimeters from the X-ray source, from the point source. And there is also a distance of 10 centimeters between this detector and the skin, the exit skin of the phantoms. The field size at the detector is 35 centimeters wide and 45 centimeters high. And the source should be centered in height between the top of the liver and the bottom of the pelvis, and laterally between the left and rightmost extensions of the pelvis. And the task was to calculate organ absorbed doses for for 2 handful of organs, normalized to firstly entrance air camera free in air, and second to the camera area product. There were 8 participants who solved this task, and it was part of the task to determine the location of the source point. And here you see the results of the participants of the coordinates of the source. On the left-hand side, those for the male phantom, and on the right-hand side for the female phantom. And you see that most participants' coordinates were quite similar to the reference one, but still slightly different. So obviously there was some room for interpretation where exactly this source point was to be located. And interestingly, one participant used a quite different coordinate system than all the others. He moved the origin to the center of the phantom array instead of where it is originally placed at the right front bottom edge of the phantom array. Here you can see the participants' initial results for the organ doses normalized to entrance air camera free in air for the male phantom. And these are not the original results of the participants. They are divided by the reference solution. So these are ratios of the participant solutions divided by the reference solution. So good agreement can be seen when these ratios are close to 1. And you see that there are indeed many are rather close to 1, but there are also some results that deviate by factors. Here you see all these results. On the left-hand side, those for the male phantom. On the right-hand side, those for the female. And on top are these ratios, the coefficients normalized to entrance air camera, and on the bottom those normalized to the camera area product. And you see that there are many solutions in better agreement with the reference solution for the normalization quantity entrance air camera. So there were obviously difficulties with the normalization quantity camera area product. So there were several reasons of discrepancies between the participants and the master solutions. There were selected cases where individual organs differed more than the others. So reasons were wrong tissue material assignment to individual organs. Sometimes the selection of a wrong organ identification number. So that means then a different organ has been considered. And even some typing errors were occurring. Then we found errors evaluating the air camera as normalization quantity, either by evaluating the entrance air camera including backscatter instead of free in air as we wanted to have it, or one participant evaluated the air camera free in air at 1 meter from the source, instead at the entrance air camera at the distance from the source where the central ray enters the phantom. And there were several participants who were not familiar with the normalization quantity gamma area product. So here you can see now the revised solutions. The participants got feedback how their results compared with the reference solution and the opportunity to revise their results. And 7 participants actually revised their results. And this is the same arrangement of the revised solutions. Left-hand side, the male phantom, right-hand side, the female. On the top, the normalization per entrance air gamma, and the bottom 2 plots, the normalization per gamma area product. And now you see that the ratio, these are again the ratios, so they should be close to 1 for good agreement. And you see that that many are now really close to 1, but there are still deviations of several tenths of % in some selected cases. Now I would like to say a few words about general problems, not for this task, but what we found for all of these 6 different tasks, or for some of them. Some participants submitted results that were wrong, although they could have been aware that the results were not really reasonable if they had applied certain quality assurance measures. So there was the possibility for plausibility considerations in several tasks. For example, the homogeneous exposure conditions of the ground contamination and the cloud exposure. These result in similar magnitudes of organ doses for all organs because they are quite homogeneous. And if individual organs differ from all the others, then it's clear that there must be an error. Or if in some cases there were several energies involved, and if a value, it is highly unlikely that a value for a single intermediate energy is entirely outside the range of values for other energies. And also there are so many calculations available in the literature for a vast variety of exposure conditions, so that it would also be possible to look for some literature data for similar exposure conditions and look if their own results are of a reasonable magnitude. And a further problem that we found, that we had with initially erroneous results, was that some participants did not disclose to us what changes they applied during revising the results. And then we cannot judge the appropriateness of their measures, of course, and the reasons for the initial errors remain unclear. And that would, of course, be helpful to gain insights what errors have been made typically, because that might help in future for similar tasks, or also for giving hints to other participants who might have the same problem. So to summarize these intercomparison exercises, EURADOS Working Group 6 has conducted an intercomparison exercise with tasks of practical interest in medical physics, as well as occupational and environmental radiation protection. And the correct simulation of the proposed tasks requires the understanding of the physical quantities involved and the ability to combine the ICRP-ICRU reference computational phantoms correctly with radiation transport codes. Sometimes we found a lack of awareness of the necessity to quality assure computational results, for example, by plausibility checks or also by comparison with literature data for similar exposure conditions. Nevertheless, we believe that such studies are beneficial to the field of computational dosimetry. They provide a direct training of the participants via feedback with the task organizers. And this also leads to an increased availability of representative dose values for various exposure conditions. And this may aid future novice users in the quality assurance of their methods. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and hand over to Vorje Prikic, who will talk about investigations into the dose to fetus under maternal proton therapy.
Actually, Vorje, before you start, I suggest that we try to have one of the polls that are remaining, which was actually a question whether people have participated in our exercises. So, Kerstin or Babs, could you start this poll, please? No, that was not the right one. So somehow the polls are not appearing in the order that they should. No, this also not. In my list, there's another one appearing, which actually asks people whether they have participated in EURADOS exercises. Okay. Okay, it doesn't. Okay, the system doesn't allow us to ask this question. Sorry, Roy, for taking some time from you, but actually Maria finished early. So I now hand over to you. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Maria, for the introduction. My name is Vorje Prikic, as Maria has already said, and I'm from the Faculty of Medicine in Croatia at the University of Osijek. And I'm going to talk about the joint exercise between the workgroups 9 and workgroup 6 that had the topic about the proton therapy in the pregnancy. So at first I'm going to give you some background about the workgroup 9 activities to better understand why is this kind of simulation important in our activities. So basically, workgroup 9 focuses on out-of-field doses in proton therapy. This is very important since there are secondary neutrons produced during the proton therapy, and this is unavoidable due to interaction of proton beam with beamline materials, either with patient body. So the workgroup 9 focuses on assessment of neutron dose equivalent in proton therapy facilities and the determining of out-of-field doses during the proton therapy. Naturally, one of special cases for the out-of-field determination of dose is determinations to the doses to the fetus during the proton therapy of the mother. Why are Monte Carlo simulations important in proton therapy besides this specific example? Is because we want to compute the neutron doses, and these neutron doses are not considered by the treatment planning system, and they are not calculated into the patient's dose. As well, they can be used for the shielding, for the calculations of the shielding in the proton facilities in terms of calculating the neutron dose equivalent. And Monte Carlo can provide you the spectral neutron fluence both inside the facility, inside the treatment room or outside the treatment room, so it can give you the valuable information about the for choosing appropriate detectors to detect these neutrons. And then about this you can judge from this neutron spectrum. What are the known issues when you are performing the high energy simulations? Some of the codes use models, especially when energies used in the simulations are above 150 megaelectronvolts. So these nuclear models can be internuclear cascade model, pre-equilibrium models, or evaporations model. Which one is more suitable? That's up to each each one who is performing the simulation to choose or to judge according to literature or annuals or something like that. Okay, when workgroup 9 performs the experimental intercomparisons campaigns, then usually Monte Carlo simulation campaign follows this experimental campaign. These kind of intercomparisons are the one without reference solution. So what we do is that we sit down, all the participants from the campaign sit down together. So we have different participants, and we all use different codes or code versions. And naturally, each one of us have a different approach for solving the issue. And then it's up to us to reach the final solution in the best way, in our opinion. Okay, I'm going to present now. My voice is unclear. Sorry, I'll try to put my microphone and perhaps talk slower. One of the tasks was the estimation of the dose to the fetus. And we tried to set up the conditions for the for the simulation after the experimental campaign that is going to follow, that is going to be happening in the near future. So we took some initial simulation conditions, but not for the exact proton therapy of the patient, but we took some simplified conditions. For example, we had a circular beam of 3 centimeters that is hitting the patient's brain, and we had spread out backpeak with range 10 modulation 5 centimeters, but this was taken from the water phantom measurements, not for the patient, as I already said. For the phantom, we initially used the pregnant phantom that's called Katya from the Helmholtz University, and she's 24 weeks pregnant, and her geometrical and anatomical characteristics are given in this table. The most important one for the Monte Carlo simulations is that she had 15.7 millions of voxels. Okay, eventually the group meets regularly each month or each 2 months, and at the first meeting we saw that when we compared our results, that our results differ significantly, up to 50%, and then it makes you think or ask question, what went wrong? First of all, we wanted to check was it the code. Okay, there were all the participants used the MCMP, but some of them used MCMPX and some of them MCMP 6.2. But since all the participants had the access to both code versions, all of them repeated the simulations for both codes, but that didn't help to harmonize the results. Then you start asking the question, what else could be wrong? Then you check the positioning of the beam, for example. Have everyone set up the source correctly? Is it hitting the center of the brain? So everyone prepared the figures about the visualization of the target and the SOBP profile. We compared it. Everything was okay. Then we asked, was it the phantom? I don't mean that something is wrong with the Katya phantom, but participants can make errors. As Maria already said, perhaps there is a wrong definition of material, perhaps there is a copy-paste error, perhaps there is a error in setting up the tally in the wrong organ or something like this. And it is very important to emphasize that at this point, we were granted to use the University of Florida phantoms that also had, it's a family of phantoms that range from 5th week of pregnancy until the 38th week of pregnancy. But possible pitfall if you want to perform the simulation with these phantoms is that in US, pregnancy is calculated as post-conceptual weeks, and in Europe we calculate it as weeks of gestation. The major difference between these phantoms was that it had the University of Florida phantoms have a significantly higher number of voxels that gives you stronger demands of the computational resources that are in the nucleus. When we check the possible errors in tissue compositions and telepositioning, that led us that difference in the tissue compositions was only 0.3%, and that's way below the statistical error, so that was not the problem. And finally, we checked the nuclear models. Each of participants looked at the output from their files, and we noticed that, for example, MCMP-EX uses much more models than MCMP 6.2, as you can see in this table. So we all agreed which atomic number of the elements, mass numbers of the elements, and the nuclide cross-section identifiers should be used. When we harmonized our inputs in this way, we obtained the errors among the participants and among the cause within the statistical error, except in one specific case where we noticed that University of Florida phantom has only a half dose when we compare it to the Katia phantom. Why this happened? Actually, the reviewer also insisted on reporting the fetal doses, but we had the major difference among two different phantoms. We performed new simulations to see what is the possible reason, what possible answer for this. And you can see that what we determined that there are geometrical characteristics between the phantoms. For example, if you can, as you can see in the figure on the left, Katia has slightly tilted head, so the belly is way more exposed to the scattered radiation, and naturally fetus received somehow bigger dose. Except that fetus position in the Katia phantom is a bit higher than in the University of Florida. So this also gives the reason to the dose in the Katia phantom is increased. This is very important since we all know that fetus is constantly moving during the pregnancy, and when mother is undergoing the proton therapy, fetus will probably move, and this can be very important since it causes up to 50% of the errors. And in the end, I want to give you a few hints to pick up. Okay, first of all, keep your file names and files organized. This is based on my own experience. Just remember that at some point you might present the results of your calculations at some webinar, and you will need to dig on the files that were saved 3 years ago, and you might have an issue, as I had, finding the appropriate files. In the intercomparisons with no representative solution, in my opinion, it's very important to have the regular periodic meetings of the group, where you can exchange your opinions. Plus, if you're lazy, it can force you to do something every month to have something new to report in the group meeting. So it can be beneficial for everyone. Also, one important thing is to avoid the biases. For example, sharing the input or finding the input online. This is very popular nowadays with ChatGPT. If you want to for example, the input for you, try to make your own input. That's very, you will know where you made the error, but if you copy paste something, then you won't be able to track it. Before publishing your data or reporting them, try to compare your results with already published data. And then try to see do your results fit or not. Actually, what was the punchline of this exercise? When you're using simulations in proton therapy and writing the paper, try to report which cross sections have you used in your publication. So if anyone wants to repeat your calculations, he can have the appropriate information. Okay, then about the number of voxels, as I already told, 100 million of voxels can cause the significant requirements for the computational resources that you have. For example, even visualization of the Fourier phantom on the regular laptop can take up to several hours. And when you're running productive simulations, it can take up to 2 days before even starting the first particle. I'm not saying that skipping geometry is good. You can perform it in your initial simulations, but when you're repeating simulations with a big change conditions and not geometrical one, maybe you can skip the geometry check. It will speed up the simulation significantly. And in proton therapy, basically, there are codes that are capable of importing inputs directly from treatment planning systems. Unfortunately, MCMP is not one of them. So if you want to perform the simulations in proton therapy, try considering using one of these codes. Thank you for your attention. As I already said, this presentation is not is only based on the real-life events. But if you want to see the documentary, you can refer to these two papers. And I have only a few seconds left. Today's date is 3rd month and 14 days of the year, so International Pi Day. We are all dealing with numerical calculations, and pi is a very important number in our life, so happy Pi Day to everyone who is celebrating. This was all from me. I'm handing over to Hans. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Roy. And actually, before I start with my presentation, I would like to add something that I forgot to say. The special issue is a virtual special issue. It's online at the page of radiation measurements. Some of the papers are open access, some are not. But we have put all papers on archive. So if you type in the title of the title of the paper in Google, you will actually get the original publication on radiation measurements and also the archive publication. All right, so Roy actually pointed out that okay, sometimes simulations can be very complex, and there are many things where you can do something wrong. In the exercise I would like to present now, we did something completely different. We chose a very, very simple example, a very academic example, but still very instructive in the end. Just a second. Oops. Here we go. So, okay, so the simulation setup was really, really simple. You use a single gold nanoparticle in water. You irradiate it with a narrow photon beam, and you actually consider two different sizes of nanoparticles, 50 and 100 nanometers, and you also consider two different radiation spectra. X-ray radiation spectra produced from an X-ray machine with a tungsten target and some aluminum filtering, and the photon fluence is shown here on the left-hand side. All right, so the tasks to be solved were, okay, you consider your nanoparticle shown on the left, which is surrounded by water. You divide this water into different shells. And one of the tasks was to determine the energy imparted in these thin spherical shells around the nanoparticle, with the idea to determine the ratio that you get when you have the nanoparticle there, or when the volume of the nanoparticle is also filled with water. The second task was was related to determining the energy spectrum of electrons in thicker spherical shells around the nanoparticle. This was actually basically the initial formulation. And I would like to include you now and ask you, what would you score if someone tells you score the energy spectrum in a volume? So, Kerstin, would you please start the poll? Okay. All right. Okay, the statistics is not yet very good. It's only 14 responses now. I'm still waiting a few seconds. Okay, now we are at 42. All right, 52. Okay, I wait for another 3 seconds for a last update. Okay, there were a few more answers coming. Okay, that's quite diverse. Okay, some don't know. Okay, that's fine. And the majority will actually take the energy distribution of electrons entering the volume. Okay, so I think we can close the poll now. Okay, so actually a good thing to do if you are unsure what to do is to ask. So you ask, what shall I score? And the answer was then, okay, we are interested in the electrons leaving the nanoparticle. And I don't go for another poll, but this is again something which is not really unique, because you can actually only consider electrons that are produced in the nanoparticle. You have to think about what happens when electrons go out or backscattered and go out again. Or you actually have to consider whether your code that you are using is actually giving you a proper tally for that. However, I mean, besides these ambiguities, the differences we found in the end were not due to these reasons. All right, so in the end, you get your data from your participants. Okay, it's basically tables with numbers. And in order to compare them, you actually plot them. And hey, why don't we see anything? Okay, the reason is that the data are somewhere down here in the left bottom corner. So if you plot them in a linear scale, it's not very informative. So we go for a log-log scale. Okay, that's a little bit interesting. So there are 2 participants, the same problem was solved, but definitely some differences there. And before I go into these differences, I would like to ask actually another poll. So the x-axis here is electron energy in keV, and I would be interested in an estimate how big the proportion of electrons is in this yellow shaded area. So, Kerstin, could you please start the next poll? Okay, then maximize it. Okay. So 18 responses already. Okay, 41, 57. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Okay. All right, so I actually close the poll now. Great, thank you. So I'm not answering the question now because I want to keep up the tension, but I return to that question, I promise you. So let's first have a look at these 2 different spectra. If we look a little bit closer, it really looks like a constant offset on the y-axis. and the y-axis is logarithmic, so it looks like a constant factor. And in order to find out what happened here, you actually have to go back to your data. And usually, I mean, these data basically they have an x-axis, they have a y-axis, and even for the x-axis, there's some different possibilities. It could be a logarithmic or a linear bin size. Usually, when you have a bin, what is the meaning of this number? Is it the mean energy in the bin? It's the energy in the center of the bin. It's the start of the bin, the end of the bin. These are all different possibilities what these numbers can mean. And in fact, different codes use different conventions. So if you compare results from different codes, beware that they may mean something different. In this case, it really looks like both participants gave the mean energy in the bin, and one used a bin size of 5 eV and one of 10 eV. Okay, more interesting is the question, what is the second column? And again, there's different options what this could be. It's a histogram, so it could be the absolute number of counts in that bin, or it could be the frequency per primary particle, or it could be the relative frequency, which is normalized to the integral over the whole distribution, or it could be the frequency density per primary particle. So tallies that are coming with codes are usually giving the frequency density per primary particles. Not all of them, unfortunately. And sometimes in some codes, like in Xeon 4, for instance, you have to do the tallying yourself. And you really should understand what you are doing and report how you did it, because that will help others to reproduce your results or to check what might have gone wrong. And it's relevant, knowing this information is relevant for comparisons, and also for if you want to do things like rebinning your data or calculating integral values. And in fact, for the sake of time, I actually have a few spare slides in the end that will be posted on the EURADOS website, where I give a little bit more detail on this, but it would take too long to explain that now. So now let's go back to this spectrum. So the first thing we can do is actually do a rebinning, which is now shown by these red and dark blue curves. And you will also notice that I no longer show a curve which is just where the points are just connected by lines. I show now actually curves which are constant in certain intervals. And this is actually what the information within a bin usually is. You have either the number of counts, or you have a frequency density per bin. And this is what the y-axis is showing. It's the frequency density per photon in reciprocal EV. So in fact, when you look back at the data, you will, it turned out that one participant was actually reporting the frequency density in EV. That's a participant B with the red curve, and the other one was reporting the frequency. So if you correct that, correct means you divide by the bin width, then you, then you get a correction, and then you get this bright blue curve, and this is much smaller, has much smaller discrepancies from the red curve that it had before. Okay, so, and now we come to another point. If I go back to this slide, with the double logarithmic scale, you have this problem that actually your y-axis is varying over orders of magnitude. And if you want to have a more quantitative representation of your spectrum, you should do something like this, which I call microdosimetry style, because I first saw that in microdosimetry, where on the y-axis now you plot the energy or whatever value you have on the x-axis times this frequency density per photon, and you plot it on a linear scale. And in that way, the area under the curve is proportional to the contribution of the respective intervals to the total integral. So when you, okay, this is just highlighting this. So the x-axis is logarithmic, the y-axis is linear, and the y-axis is actually the quantity on the x-axis multiplied with the frequency density. And if you then do the analysis, it turns out that this yellow shaded area, the proportion of electrons at energies below 3 keV is about 59%. And you may remember from the poll, actually 1/3 of the people actually said that it would be like that. So I have to speed up a little bit. So in the end, you will have your results, and this is now results for the 4 different cases that were studied, reported by the same participants. And you see now curves that are somehow looking similar, but there are still differences between the different curves for the different situations. And the question is now, how is it plausible or meaningful? So one thing you can do is simply calculate the integral over these spectra, and then you get these numbers that are shown here on the right-hand side. So it's something between 2.5 and 8.8, 10 to the minus 3. Is this a meaningful value? Well, it's difficult to tell. But what you also can calculate is you calculate the number of interactions in a nanoparticle per photon, which you see is in the same order of magnitude. And if you then actually normalize your spectra to this number of interactions in the gold nanoparticle, you get a picture like this. And the integrals are now numbers like shown here on the right-hand side. So this is basically how many electrons do I get out of a nanoparticle when a photon interacts there. And it's something between 3 and 5. And this is actually something meaningful. It's what you would expect anyway. And in principle, you can now compare the different cases with each other. So on the left top corner, it's both for the 50 kVp spectrum, different nanoparticle sizes. And what you see is that for the large, in the high energy range, there's not much difference between the two curves. And this is quite clear. You have the same photon energy spectrum. You expect that the fast electrons will basically not notice how big your nanoparticle is. But for low energies, you have a big difference. And if we go to the left bottom picture, where we have now comparing the 51 nanoparticle with 2 different energy spectra, you see that for low energy electrons, it doesn't make a big difference which energy spectrum you are using, but for the high energy, it does. All right, so I will now come to an interesting question that you probably might ask. That's quite advanced, yeah, okay. But where do I get this number of photon interactions from? And the answer is, okay, didn't you score it in your simulation? If you didn't, you should read our paper. And we will actually write a EURADOS report on the exercise where we will provide templates so that you can calculate it yourself. So take-home messages. The first thing is always be sure that you understand the problem you want to simulate. The second thing is be aware that there are pitfalls with spectra. Simulation results are generally not just numbers. They are physical quantities and they come with a unit, and you really have to be aware which unit you are using, particularly if you are comparing with results of others. You should, this has already been said by the others, check the plausibility of your results. And never be sad when you are wrong. That's a chance to learn, and that's how science works. And last not least, don't trust computers. They never do what you want. They only do what you programmed. And with this, I thank you very much. And I have some spare slides, but I don't show them now. So I would now hand over to John for the question and answer session.
Oh, thank you, Hans. Actually, I think those take-home messages are true for much of science, actually, aren't they? Not just Monte Carlo, certainly not just its interaction. So, usual things. We have I was going to say one question in the chat that's come up. I see it's just actually been answered. So currently there are no waiting to be answered. So I do, of course, encourage everybody to put something into the chat if they wish to ask to any of the speakers, or more general comments. In the meantime, I'll sort of send out to thank the three presenters on behalf of everybody who's listening for your interesting presentations. So do we have any chat that's coming? If we don't, I'll be mean and ask a question of my own in that case. But that's a hard question. I mean, I think it's quite fair to say that in all of the presentations, people struggled a lot with different aspects of the work. Sort of certainly thinking of sort of Maria's one on the computation on the voxel phantoms. There's a lot of misunderstanding about how to use these phantoms and how to work with them. So I guess the question is, what do the presenters think that organisations such as ICIP, for example, could do or should do to help the field with this?
Oh, that's a really difficult question, John. I mean, one of the things they are already doing is to organize these mentorships, where they actually look for people who could mentor younger scientists, early stage researchers, working on some projects related to radiation protection. I think, yeah, they could encourage activities like this. Yeah, it's really difficult to answer. I mean, you all know that we have discussed this already within Working Group 6, how to proceed to well, actually give better training to the community. And well, I think it's just keeping up this kind of activity, because basically what I see, for instance, when I review papers, it's quite often that people do a simulation and then don't think about anything. They have a well-established code like MCMP, and it gives them some tallies and some results, and then they think that they are really correct. Even if they are 20 orders of magnitude of any reasonable value. So I think that's, I think this kind of exercises as we did are really probably the way forward, because codes are getting easier to use, so it doesn't take much expertise to use them anymore. And of course, with what is this saying about Linux, with a lot of freedom, there comes a lot of responsibility. And it's really, I think it's really difficult. I mean, it's difficult. How can I say that? I mean, usually the best way of learning something is doing it together with someone who is experienced and trying it out yourself, and having someone who is actually telling you from time to time, okay, this must be wrong. And apart from that, it's really learning. I mean, basically, I think it's an illusion to believe that you can have a simulation code that will give you an easy way to do a good simulation. That's okay. I'm getting a little bit pathetic, but I think that's probably the issue. I mean, that's yeah. Well, maybe if ICRP would say such things as well. I don't want to give to be the only one who's answering. Maria, you have been engaged with ICRP quite a lot.
Yeah, I think ICRP in such publications as they present, for example, the phantoms, there are calculation results also in there. So if one tries to reproduce them, they should have the same order of magnitude, and if not, but of course that's not a very good guidance. It's just a option for quality assurance. I think with this new mesh phantoms, input files have also been provided for different codes for specific problem to calculate. So this is probably really helpful.
Yeah, but it goes against what Roya suggested, that you should not always download things easily from the internet.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, do we still have an audience? I mean, I'm just wondering.
We do. With 3 questions have come in actually. We're talking of downloading things from the internet. One of the questions that's come in is that are these input files available for the exercises? I don't think that they are.
The input files. Okay, I'm not quite sure what the question means.
So I interpret that mean as those the exercises will be defined as intercomparison. You know, do we have reference or template input files, or the input files that the organisers used that maybe people could be used as a teaching aid?
Well, generally not, I would say.
Yeah.
Generally not, and I'm okay. We could have thought about this, but again, then the situation is okay. I mean, it could be for looking how people did it, right? How people set up certain problems. That could be useful. I don't know whether we could think about this now. I also don't know how useful it would be. I mean, basically what we did in the exercise, or most of the exercises, when we had reference solutions, different people were actually producing the reference solution, doing it by themselves. So, and I know that this was also a process of, I don't know, 2 years or so, when we all had these meetings, like Roya said, coming together and seeing whether really the problem was solvable. Okay, so the answer to if the question is, do we have, how do they call that in Xion 4, these examples that one can download? I don't think so. We do, in most cases, we do have the exercise description, and we now, of course, have the reference solutions where reference solutions existed, or we have the, we have basically the results.
Yeah, input files are also code dependent.
Yeah, so I suppose we don't have any generic ones for that reason. Yeah. I suppose speaking of, most of these exercises, I think all of these exercises have now been published in the open literature as the question, and of those, the authors, of course, are contactable as corresponding authors. So certainly, I can speak for myself. I can't speak for any others, but I can speak for myself that if somebody were to email me because they were interested in the exercise and asked for the input file that I used in my exercise, I'd be very happy to share it with them and work with them to understand it. But I think perhaps we would all be a little bit wary about putting input files up there and claiming that they are somehow infallible, and that everybody should copy them, because we are human beings as well, of course.
Okay. Okay, there's one question whether we only have compared Monte Carlo results or whether we also used measured results. In most cases, it was just a comparison of codes. We wanted to see how well people are able to reproduce things. In many of the examples, we basically there was no dedicated experiment related to that, but there were similar experiments in literature. If I think about all these ICRP reference phantoms exercises, there were definitely some studies at some point that could be used for comparison, at least for the order of magnitude. Okay, there's another question which I also find interesting, which John already answered to some extent. It's the question about signal and background. I'm not quite sure whether I understand the question either. If it's a background from the I have this idea. I'm not quite sure what signal and background would be in that case. So basically, the question is, in reality, the majority of the dose require the signal and the background measurements, which is basically a background measurement then would probably be a kind of a 0-point determination for the dosimeter. And the question is whether this has been taken into account in the Monte Carlo simulations. I would say no, because the scenarios we considered were for a particular experimental setup.
Yes, and even for the medical applications, there are publications that are showing that simply treatment rooms should be included into simulations. Majority of the publications still does not include the treatment room completely. It increases the complexity of the Monte Carlo significantly and the calculation time. In the presented papers, we also didn't include the treatment room. If this is meant by background signal.
That's something I mentioned in the chat. I don't think it would affect the results too much. Of course, it'd be subtracting a constant term, but I think certainly some of the anomalies that were found would probably persist anyway, I think, wouldn't they?
I'm afraid so.
Another hard question that's come in, and one I wouldn't be able to answer, is from a beginner's perspective, what MCMP simulation code would you recommend? I think my short answer to that would be I wouldn't recommend one, because of course it depends exactly what you're doing. And to give a slightly long answer to that, if you're interested in neutron calculations, I wouldn't choose Penelope. If you were interested in very, very high energy calculations, or might be sort of thinking of some of the ones with Fluke or Janda got a very high history in that, but I don't think any is necessarily intrinsically better than any other, or harder than any other, or any easier than other. So I think it would depend on why you want to do it. Yes, yes. I mean, certainly no code should ever be used as a black box, but possibly the easiest answer is that the best one to use would be the one that's already been used by colleagues in your institute, if you have any, and they could maybe help you along the line. Probably the answer I would give, but I use MCMP, and certainly if students were to come into UKHSA, that's probably the one I'd first encourage them with, because there's that network within our organisation. But I don't think that answers the question, but it answers the question from my point of view. I don't know if anybody else has any comments.
I have perhaps an advice. When you want to start simulating something, I will give again a medical example. For example, you want to perform Monte Carlo simulations of computational tomography. Just Google these keywords, Monte Carlo simulations of computer tomography, and you will see which code is most frequently used, and then you will have the more references from this code. I'm not sure if it's good advice, but it can give you the feeling about what you should get. So maybe.
Yeah, there's another question here, which is actually a little bit looking in the crystal ball, but what is the future of Monte Carlo simulation in radiation transport? Or are there no improvements left? I don't think so. The problem is that I mean, when computational dosimetry started, we used very simple phantoms, simple geometrical structures, and the refinements that we have today with the flexible phantoms is basically due to more computer power and also more progress in the codes themselves. I think one of the big challenges or one of the big improvements might be in the future that we manage to accelerate the Monte Carlo codes to be able to even, I mean, either simulate situations that correspond to higher doses or to more details like track structure simulations. I think there's definitely some area where there still will be development. The most challenges at the moment is, I would say, okay, one of them is track structure, but the other one is definitely high energies, because there basically we are in the whole field is in a situation that, of course, we do have codes, but we don't have really the input data for the codes to run the simulations. We do have input data or input models for the cross sections, but there are so many different ones, and we actually have to face large uncertainties in these cross sections. So there's, I would expect that there's still room for improvement and room for further development.
I'd say the same thing. It'll probably track with Moore's law, wasn't it? As computers get better, so too with the applications with which we use them within the field.
Yes, there's actually a very good question now also about what about the things to consider before the simulation? Well, one of the things I usually would like to, or I try to when it's possible, is to make an estimate without doing a calculation. I mean, for instance, looking up in the literature whether someone has already calculated something similar, and then make an educated guess about how the problem that I'm interested in would be different from that one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You should normally get a feel within an order of magnitude at least what type of result you might expect. You know, certainly it's true in all sciences. Certainly very true in computational science that of garbage in, garbage out. You know, I think it's very, very, very easy to come up with a lot of plausible-looking rubbish with Monte Carlo. So yeah, so anything you can to get rid of that is, you know, is certainly valuable. I think we probably all guilty to some extent of computational modelers. I think we probably put far too much weight on statistical uncertainties in what we quote. Certainly, I've been to many presentations where people are standing up and giving their results to, you know, a tiny fraction of 1% uncertainty, and completely ignoring the tens of percent uncertainties of systematic uncertainty that may be in there. So maybe to put that more towards the question, I'll you know, sort of certainly try to remember that the more accurately you can describe the thing you're trying to model, the more accurately you can put that information in your model, the more accurate results will be.
And there's another interesting question which I found interesting, because I mean, Maria, it's up to you to answer, because we had a complete paper in our special issue on that. What would happen if you found ICRP references don't give you the complete data for simulations? So I interpret this, I mean, bone dosimetry, for instance.
Yeah, for bone dosimetry, I think ICRP have given
that's right,
the data, but in this publication where they issued them, it has not been used. This is this is a bit of a discrepancy, but I don't think that we can make ICRP responsible for providing entire data that we need for calculations. That's not their task.
Well, yeah, that's right. But I think, I mean, basically, I don't know what the intention behind that question is.
I don't know
But
either.
of course, we have situations where we know that a voxelized phantom is not suited. I mean, in bone marrow dosimetry was already considered. Skin dosimetry is another one,
yes,
where we do have to think about it. And well, I mean, that's of course we cannot hold anyone responsible for anything. I would say, in the end, if there are usually no perfect solutions for all problems. So you will always have problems where you actually have to think about it. And for instance, skin dosimetry from hot particles, this is something we are thinking about how to tackle that. It's something, there are problems that have not yet been solved.
I think that leads quite well onto another question actually about ICRP. Our ICRP Committee 2 taking a keen interest in how well the radiation protection community are able to use the voxel phantoms that they distribute. I mean, I don't know whether I've had any response or comment about this intercomparison or this special issue, either formally or informally from ICRP about this. Maybe,
I'm not aware of any official.
Well, okay, we could ask our member on ICRP 2, Committee 2, to make them aware of this special issue. Just to bounce back. Okay, there is another question. Could you give examples of actual practical applications of the Monte Carlo simulations for dose assessment of real situations such as overexposure, incidents, accidents, emergencies? I think, John, that you are the right person to answer that.
Yes. I mean, not now in terms of references. I couldn't put anything on there. If they want to get in contact with me, I could send some. But certainly, I can give some examples of where partial body exposures, people have been where perhaps a dose meter on some part about their pass and have received a partial body exposure or some highly inhomogeneous exposure. Of course, the dose meter can only ever record the dose to itself. So it can only ever tell you the absorbed dose at the point of test within that aluminium monoxide or lithium fluoride or whatever it is. And that could differ greatly from the doses that the individual has got and their internal organs have got. So there have been examples where people have put models of the dose meter at some location about the person and exposed them in that inhomogeneous field and looked at the dose that the dose meter received and the dose that the organs received, or the doses rather that the different organs received, and come up with conversion factors that interrelate one to the other. So this has been used in practice. It's being developed in retrospective dosimetry as well, where we have non-conventional dosimeters that need to be converted or need to be considered. And as it has been used in overexposure instance, where we're trying to recreate doses or the dose map within an individual and their organs within it from single point of test dosimetry. So I hope that answers the question to a point. I said I couldn't give you any references here and then, but it certainly has had real application.
Just a question about examples. I think that's quite fine. So we have a comment, I think, in the chat by Sine that we missing data for biological matter. Okay, I completely agree with that. And this is not only true for low energies, but also for high energies. And there's another question that somehow popped up. I don't know why it popped up separately on my screen. Dominic Campbell is asking that she works with thermoluminescent dosimeters and has 2 machines that give her completely different results. Okay, and how do you trust that the quality of the data isn't compromised? I mean, that's basically not a computational dosimetry question, but a dosimetry question in general. I mean, if you have 2 different machines, you probably don't know which is the right one. And the best thing is to have a third one in the loop. I mean, that's really a very difficult question, because if you come on these things, yeah, I mean, I would say reproducibility and interlaboratory comparisons are key to make sure that your equipment is running properly. That's by the way also one of the activities of EURADOS. We have not in computational dosimetry, but in EURADOS in general, we have these intercomparisons of dosimeters and dosimeter measurements. And this is basically also an important aspect of quality assurance. And the only way to assure quality is that you compare either with things that you know are correct, which is usually not the case when you have measurements, but with the ensemble of all the others. So it's not a. I think it's the point you are raising, Dominic, is quite valid. Quality assurance is not something that comes by itself, and you are already doing a very good job if you use two different readers, because normally instruments can fail, instruments can have a wrong calibration, and yeah, there's okay, there's no how do you say that? There's no golden way to assure quality. That's in no area of science. You always have to do comparisons. You have to compare and to test, and you have to when you come to these things that, okay, one instrument says the card is not having a dose, the other one says there's a dose, then okay, you're probably up with a problem. One of the readers is obviously not functioning properly.
So I don't see any more questions coming in. I think there's still a few comments that have been made rather than the specific questions or comments, and some of the answers already been given.
Yes.
Anybody else is seeing any more? Otherwise, maybe sort of invite anybody to ask if they want to make any final questions or comments. I realise we've already gone 20 minutes over time anyway.
Yes,
so
right.
If not, perhaps this might be a good time to draw to a close.
I think so, yes. And I really thank the audience for these many questions. Okay. Is the working group currently planning further intercomparisons? Yes, we have one which is in the pipeline. It's about, well, what was originally the uncertainty exercise in track structure simulations, which has now taken a little bit different focus. In the other areas, we don't have plans for intercomparisons at the moment. Yes, full stop. Okay.
I would suspect we will, though, at some point.
Yeah, definitely. We will definitely.
The answer is not currently, but
yes,
but yeah, watch this space for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Do you have any radiation detection group for collaboration? I don't understand this question. I mean, most of the work in EURADOS is actually experimental work. So there are many people who are doing practical measurements. And originally, the working group 6 was actually a working group that was assisting all these experiments. Okay, I don't know whether this answered your question. Okay. Okay, there's a comment by Sina, which I also don't understand fully. I'm afraid that most errors come from the physics and the corresponding Monte Carlo technique. Okay, I don't understand that, but maybe we can discuss that at a working group 6 meeting. Yeah, so really thank you very much to the audience for this intensive discussion. And also, okay, so someone is asking whether there's a possibility to work with you in the radiation detection simulation group. Yes, of course. I mean, all of EURADOS is open to new collaborators. So if you want to join working group 6, send me an email and I can send you the additional details. Okay, then I would say, okay, we have, I promised Babs that we would not overrun by too much. Okay, but anyway, so thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much to my fellow presenters here. I enjoyed it very much, and I close this 18th webinar. Thank you.